You are listening to the Mohua show, where it's all about celebrating the junoon among changemakers and their journey.
Instagram facilitates the sexualization and eroticization of underage girls. Thousands of men are openly sexualizing children on Instagram in plain sight. It's become a marketplace where children are styled and posed and packaged to appeal to adult audiences. Girls' personal Instagram accounts and so-called fan and shout-out pages serve as sneak peeks of the content predators can access if they pay for it. So instead of protecting kids, Instagram's algorithm is actually amplifying these accounts and pushing them out to a wider audience, further increasing that risk, and Instagram is profiting the entire way. One of the really good things that this series did, it brought terminology like incel and manosphere into our conversations, which was really needed because this is a very real threat that boys are facing today. I think this series shone a light on the toxic online figures and ideologies shaping the minds of our young people today. Influencers like Andrew Tate, who we've just mentioned, were touched on in that series, and how easily boys can be radicalized into misogyny under the radar of parents and schools and the community. I really want girls to understand that the industry is selling you empowerment while profiting from your objectification are lying to you. Real empowerment isn't about being desirable. It's about having agency. It's about the freedom to say no, the freedom to speak out, to take up space, to stand with others fighting for justice.
What if I told you that rape and incest games are being marketed to 12-year-olds? That Instagram's kidfluencer world is quietly fueling a black market of exploitation. That Spotify hosted a course on how to traffic women, and it took a trauma counselor to shut it down. What Netflix hit series Adolescence gets right about the radicalization of young boys. What do you do when your 12-year-old can download a game that simulates rape? This isn't a dystopian script. This is real life. Today's episode, we are joined and extremely honored to talk about the safety of children and the future of gender equality in a digital world. And our guest today has been fighting on the front lines of it. Today's episode is not easy, but it's necessary. We're joined by Renee, a trauma counselor and tireless advocate for women and children's safety. She's worked in the field of sexual exploitation and human trafficking for over a decade, from India to Southeast Asia to Australia. And today, we are talking about what's happening right now on platforms like Spotify, Instagram, and Steam. Renee, welcome in today's episode, and I'm so honored and grateful that you took out the time to be here with me. And I've been following your work, and I'm so impressed with what you're doing and the courage that you have. So let's just start, with the petition that caught headlines. Spotify hosting Andrew Tate's courses teaching men how to manipulate and traffic women. So Renee, what did you see that pushed you, to act?
First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for being willing to have these conversations. It's very encouraging when people reach out to talk about these very difficult topics. Spotify and Andrew Tate, myself and my colleagues saw that he had courses available on Spotify that were actively teaching men how to manipulate and control and profit from the exploitation of women. This is content that blatantly contradicted Spotify's own platform rules. We had reported it and found even just the reporting process on Spotify alone was difficult to navigate. It wasn't straightforward, and it felt like that was almost intentional. And so we wanted to get our supporters on board with this and get these courses down from Spotify. So the best way, we thought, the most effective way to do that was to start this petition and link this to my work with survivors of sex trafficking overseas, because there was a direct correlation between the work that I had been doing overseas to the content that we found was available in Tate's courses on Spotify.
How do people like Tate really go out there, Renee? I mean, this really beats me. I mean, How do they get there with those millions of people following them? What is the mindset?
Yeah, look, Tate has kind of tapped into a deficit, I think, that boys are feeling right now, in that boys are feeling isolated, they're feeling angry, they're confused in a rapidly changing world. And people like Tate, he's not the only one, but he's definitely been on the front line of this. Tate and others like him are offering that false sense of identity and control through dominance, entitlement, and rage. So they're kind of, these really sexist and anti-woman ideologies, but they're repackaged as self-help or empowerment. And that can be, on the initial introduction, that can be quite appealing to boys and men. And so Tate really tapped into these kind of insecurities that boys and men are feeling today, and he's exploiting them by pushing his own agenda.
So there's a chilling report, about child influencers being groomed and exploited on Instagram, sometimes by their own parents. I mean, it's shocking. So tell us what's really happening out there.
Yeah, look, Instagram facilitates the sexualization and eroticization of underage girls. Thousands of men are openly sexualizing children on Instagram in plain sight. It's become a marketplace where children are styled and posed and packaged to appeal to adult audiences. My colleague, Lynn Swanson-Kennedy, has been heading up our campaign against Instagram, calling this out, and she's been forensically documenting cases for years, cases where child influencer accounts are flooded with sexualized comments that are often ignored or even liked by account managers, accounts where posts are being saved and shared across networks known for child sexual exploitation. Girls' personal Instagram accounts and so-called fan and shout-out pages serve as sneak peeks of the content predators can access if they pay for it. So instead of protecting kids, Instagram's algorithm is actually amplifying these accounts and pushing them out to a wider audience, further increasing that risk, and Instagram is profiting the entire way.
So if a child can't legally drive or vote, should they really be navigating the digital minefield of social media? What is your opinion on that, Renee?
My opinion is definitely not. They definitely should not be on these platforms. They're not designed for kids, but they've become the default users. Kids are being exposed to porn, predators, body dysmorphia. They're exposed to content that promotes eating disorders and suicide and self-harm. There's a whole world of content that kids just don't have the development to be able to navigate safely. And so myself and my colleagues have really been pushing for a long time for the minimum age of access to social media to be 16. We really don't believe that any child younger than 16 should be on social media. There's just too much harmful content to be navigating across those platforms. And thankfully, that this new legislation in Australia has been passed. It was passed last year in December, which was a huge win for us. We've yet to see what that looks like, how it's actually going to be implemented, but we think this is the bare minimum that could be done to help keep kids safe online.
So, Renee, Netflix Adolescence raises the chilling question that can a boy be groomed to kill by manosphere influencers like Andrew Tate? As someone who's worked so closely with survivors of exploitation, how real is the threat of boys being radicalized online? And, and what urgent conversations should really we all be having with them before it's too late? I mean, that film just broke me.
Yeah,
I do not even know the word incel, Renee.
Yeah, I think that was one of the really good things that this series did. It brought terminology like incel and manosphere into our conversations, which was really needed because this is a very real threat. that boys are facing today. I think this series shone a light on the toxic online figures and ideologies shaping the minds of our young people today. Influencers like Andrew Tate, who we've just mentioned, were touched on in that series, and how easily boys can be radicalized into misogyny under the radar of parents and schools and the community. You know, they can be in their room, in a family that is safe and loving, and still being influenced in these really harmful ways. So I think this series sparked really critical conversations that need to keep happening about how quickly this can happen, how quickly these ideologies can form in our young people's minds, and again, why we need to be talking about what they're seeing online, what they're being exposed to, you know, putting safe online safety practices, implementing those practices in our homes, making it part of our conversations around the dinner table so that our kids can know we're here. We may not understand everything that they're looking at, and we don't have to, but we do want to talk about it, and we do want to let them know that they're not alone. And if there's anything that they're coming up against that's confusing or shocking or is new, and, you know, it's kind of seeping into their belief system, that they can talk about it with people in their family. And that's how we can kind of challenge the influences and the ideas that our boys are being fed online.
It sounds like a very uphill task, Renee, because, you know, it seems impossible, because so many times, you know, when children are really growing up and they're at that cusp, they don't want to talk to anyone, and they feel that their peer group will be the right people to, you know, have a conversation with. You know, so I mean, you know, my heart, it just goes cold when one thinks about how, you know, within your homes where you're all eating their dinner together and you don't know what the child is really doing in their room by themselves, you know, with the digital world. So also let's talk about PETA, you know. So PETA has repeatedly used hyper-sexualized imagery of women to push animal rights messages. And from your work, how damaging is this kind of activism when it reinforces the very misogyny that, you know, we are trying to fight? And where do we draw the line between provocative messaging and harmful exploitation? Because it's flooded, you know, with naked women and, you know, and it's so sad that we are all consuming this kind of content, and this they're trying to actually put out a message, you know, against animal cruelty. So tell me, you know, about this.
Yeah, I mean, we've highlighted PETA's sexualized activism before. We've highlighted again just recently with the recent ad that they've come out. I mean, they not only objectify women, but they also reinforce the systems of domination and dehumanization they claim to oppose. But it's also this dehumanization of women that feeds into other issues that exist on the same continuum of harm. It's this daily objectification and sexualization of women and girls that leads to violence against women. It leads to domestic violence against women in the home. It leads to the prostitution of women and the demand for women to be available in those spaces. And it leads to sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. These are not harmless ads. I know it's very tempting to kind of brush it off as, well, if you don't like it, don't be part of it. Or, you know, if it's offensive to you, just move on, don't look at it. Unfortunately, it's just not that simple. You know, these are out in public spaces, available for everyone to see, including children. And children's ideas of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be desirable are being formed then. And what does that look like years down the road? What does that look like when they're adults and they're contributing members of society? How is that influencing the way that they interact with people in their world? So we need to challenge it where it starts. And, you know, the sexualization, objectification of women and children in advertising and media, we need to be calling that out as we see it.
So you've also raised concerns, about games like No Mercy, which simulates rape and incest and is available for kids, right? So could you elaborate on how these platforms really contribute, to the exploitation of children?
I mean, No Mercy, a 3D pornographic rape and incest simulation game. I mean, it's pretty dire. The whole premise behind the game, players assume the persona of a man who rapes his female family members, including his mother and aunt, as punishment for his mother's infidelity. I mean, it's encouraging players to participate in virtual rape scenarios. We know that there's a very established research that shows the link between how media influences behaviors and attitudes. To think that this is exempt from that and that this is just a game is incredibly naive. We know, and we've said this time and time again, this kind of media does shape beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. And this extreme content being allowed on our platforms, and just to think of who's playing these games and who's having these kind of visualizations played out over and over again in front of them is quite frankly terrifying. It does not foster a safe environment in which women and girls can live.
So Playboy is often glamorized, as a cultural icon, but it has a deeply disturbing history of exploiting young girls, some reportedly underage. So what does this say about how society really excuses abuse, when it's packaged as a luxury or legacy? And how do we begin to hold these iconic brands accountable? Because there was a Netflix series that, was done, on Hugh Hefner. And, it made him show the whole thing was about how successful and how moneyed and how he had women all around him. And it's pathetic, So please tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, Playboy has tried really hard to rebrand themselves and separate themselves from Hugh Hefner's legacy, which is not a good legacy.
At all.
Playboy's synonymous with the sexual exploitation of women and girls. As you mentioned, it's Playboy have attempted to normalize this kind of behavior with the promotion of Playboy in TV series, on T-shirts and jewelry. I mean, you see Playboy everywhere. And that's that normalization, trying to get us to accept a brand that is completely exploitative. I mean, the coercive control that Hugh Hefner had over the women in his mansion has been well documented. Playboy published nude and pornographic images of girls, portrayed girls as both desiring and being unharmed by sexual abuse. It doesn't matter what this company does to try and distance themselves from the company's historical abuse of women and girls. It is always going to be that. And I think what we need to be mindful of is this younger generation who are growing up who actually don't know about these harms. They haven't been exposed to the outing of Playboy's dark history like we have. And so it's really important that we keep calling it out, that we keep drawing attention to Playboy's history and what it actually means to wear the Playboy bunny logo on your baseball cap or T-shirt. It's not harmless. Exploitation is baked into their business model, and we have to keep calling it out and exposing Playboy for its dark history.
Absolutely. You've critiqued how the media often, mishandles gender-based violence. So can you share why does that really matter?
Yeah, media doesn't just reflect culture, it shapes it, right? So it's through that repetition, glamour, through humor even, that harmful ideas about women and violence are made to feel normal, acceptable, and even sexy. So whether it's advertising that eroticizes assault or video games like No Mercy that reward players for degrading women, or films that turn trauma into entertainment, we see this same pattern, the objectification packaged as empowerment and abuse rebranded as entertainment. I don't know, have you heard of Jean Kilbourne?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, she has done amazing work in this space, you know, communicating that media is both an educator and a persuader. Again, I think sometimes we can be quite naive. Our ads don't have an influence on me. I just ignore them. They
Yeah,
100% have an influence on us,
of
right?
course they do.
Consciously. So Jean Kilbourne has a series, Killing Us Softly, which I recommend to anyone who hasn't seen it. Just saying, media messages influence our attitudes. They influence our behaviors and beliefs, like I said before, especially when it comes to gender. When women are consistently portrayed as objects, it desensitizes us to the suffering, and it just creates fertile ground for real world violence. This doesn't just stay on a billboard. It doesn't just stay on a TV screen. It comes into our lives. So myself and my colleagues at Collective Shout, we've been challenging this for years. We've been calling out the brands, calling out platforms and corporates that normalize misogyny under the guise of just a joke or artistic expression or freedom of speech. These are arguments we hear all the time.
Yeah, we're always bombarded also, with WhatsApp messages that are jokes that are,
Yes.
making women look stupid, making women look like the one that is always nagging and, that she doesn't have too much of a brain to really think. And people continue to share those messages. Even women share that with one another. I mean, that is the level of the gaslight that is all around us.
Yeah, that internalized misogyny. Yeah,
absolutely. Internalized misogyny. I mean, that I don't think, we've not even begun that conversation yet.
Yeah.
So, what changes do you think really, need to happen, both at the global and local levels, to protect vulnerable children? My heart breaks, when you hear about survivors, their stories, because they really don't know what they got into. Fathers having raped their daughters, because there are so many female, you hear these horror stories of a father raping his own daughter because, he did not want her.
Yeah. I mean, that's at the other end of it's on that same continuum of harm, isn't it? That's how real world harm plays out, isn't it? And it is heartbreaking.
Oh, yeah, it is.
I think coming back to prevention, we need to think about prevention so that we're not coming to survivors when they've already experienced incredible trauma that sometimes takes a lifetime to overcome.
Yes.
We want to make change that prevents kids from getting to that point. So moving towards stronger regulation, I think, is key, like age verification. I mean, Australia, for example, we're implementing age verification trials so that it's harder for children to have access to pornographic content online. I mean, this feels like a no-brainer, but we've been campaigning for years, over a decade, to have age verification in place so that kids aren't being accidentally exposed to really violent, degrading pornography. Holding tech companies to account, increasing the age of access, like we have, looking at that ground level, changing legislation, holding corporations to account. I think that's a really important step, a critical step, really, in helping to create a safer world for our kids, for the next generation. So to me, that's, contacting local representatives, because they don't always know what these issues are, letting them know this is what kids are exposed to. This is what kids are seeing every day. Share survivor stories. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for us to be hearing from survivors and centering their stories and their experiences. Signing and starting petitions like we've done, building coalitions with like-minded groups, using your voice on social media like you are, using your platform to have really important conversations. These are all ways that we can be proactively creating a safer world for our kids.
So you've also had the chance of meeting survivors and hearing their stories firsthand, Renee. So can you share a bit about what you've learned from those stories and the kind of exploitations these individuals face? And does it take a complete lifetime to come out of it? And how do they feel about themselves, Renee?
Sometimes it can take a lifetime to come out of it, but not always. I think the thing that has stuck with me the most is the strength and resilience of survivors I've worked with across various countries. That really grounds everything I do, my work with survivors, and them showing me every day that we all have the capacity to overcome great adversity, but not only can we overcome it, we can also grow from it and experience life with more strength and resilience than before. I think one of the biggest things for me is seeing post-traumatic growth play out. We've all heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's, often what survivors of trauma are dealing with. But post-traumatic growth, I don't think is talked about enough. It's that most
that's
people...
beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful phrase.
I mean, get me started on post-traumatic growth and I could talk for hours, but it's experienced by a lot of people who experience trauma. Yeah. As long as they have the help of a good support system, that's key. It's, if they've got that wraparound support, it is very likely that survivors of trauma can experience strength in relationships, experience a greater sense of their inner strength. If I can get through that, I can get through anything. A greater appreciation for life. They experience a deepening of spiritual faith or a complete change in belief system, something that really anchors them, and having a sense of new opportunities. And these are areas that I often focused on when working with survivors and helping build those areas, because when you're looking at not just surviving something, but actually growing from it and flourishing, there's no end to what you can achieve. And I see women and girls live this out every day. I've worked with women in India who have come out of sexually exploitative practices, and not only have they overcome their trauma, but they're actually survivor leaders in their own community now. So they're living in their own communities, they're raising awareness about child protection, they're preventing child marriages, they're intervening when they're seeing red flags go up about children being harmed, and they're seen as figures of authority in their own community. And it gives me goosebumps to talk about, because I just think, wow, that's amazing. Even they probably couldn't have seen themselves doing that like 10 years ago. But here they are, not only having overcome adversity, but actually doing so much more than they ever thought they could.
Absolutely. It's the wings that they finally, flutter to fly away into the skies. Yeah, it's a beautiful growth. It's a beautiful growth, So can you walk us through, how these traps are laid? What patterns do you see across regions like South and Southeast Asia?
Yeah, there are definitely, in the trafficking hotspots I worked in, the drivers of sex trafficking were disturbingly consistent. Systemic, interconnected, and often hidden in plain sight. So poverty and economic equality. Poverty is one of the most exploited vulnerabilities. Families in crisis are manipulated with false promise of jobs, education, marriage. Yeah. In some cases, children, especially girls, are sold by relatives or families who genuinely believe they're giving them a better future. Yes. So that's a big driver. Cultural pressures and gender inequality. In many contexts, girls are seen as financial burdens. Yeah. So son preference, dowry expectations, limited education or employment options. These all make girls disproportionately vulnerable to exploitation. Demand-driven exploitation is another one. So trafficking doesn't exist without suppliers. It's as simple as that. Western sex tourism, the global porn industry, and local demand for commercial sexual exploitation all fuel this trade. So we see, men travel to countries in South and Southeast Asia to exploit women and children, often under the illusion of consensual transactions, ignoring the coercive circumstances behind them.
Oh boy, you just said it, Renee.
Yeah. Those are very real risks. And now, with the growth of online activity, online recruitment and grooming is a huge one. So with the rise of smartphones and social media, traffickers increasingly target children and teens online, offering fake modeling jobs or luring them into relationships that lead to trafficking and lead to live streamed abuse. Tech platforms really have become silent enablers of this exploitation. So they're just some of the way. I don't even feel like I've touched on all of it. I've just kind of skimmed the top, but they're just some of the ways that sex trafficking and human trafficking in general is playing out, not just in overseas countries. This is happening everywhere. It's happening in Australia.
It is. So, what societal myths about trafficking would you really like to debunk, Renee?
Yeah, I think the first one that people always say to me is it involves moving someone across borders, like trafficking is the same as smuggling. That's not the case. I want to debunk that first and foremost. Smuggling, it involves consent and movement across borders. Trafficking doesn't require crossing borders. It's more, I think it's important for people to understand it's defined by exploitation, not movement. Other myths are trafficking always involves kidnapping and physical restraint. Most victims aren't snatched. Most victims aren't kidnapped. Traffickers use grooming, manipulation, debt bondage, emotional coercion, false promises. I see these things play out all the time, especially with vulnerable people. So many victims don't even realize they're being trafficked. I would say most survivors that I've worked with would never have identified as a trafficking victim. It's only once they start learning more about human trafficking that they realize, that's what happened to me. I think another myth is that it only happens overseas. I get this a lot. As someone being based in Australia, people saying, it's not really a problem here. It 100% is a problem here. It's a problem everywhere. It happens in every country. Exploitation is often hidden in plain sight in brothels, hotels, construction, agriculture, or domestic work. So we really need to get familiar with the signs and what to look for. Another myth is that only women and girls are trafficked. Yes, they're disproportionately affected, especially in sex trafficking. But men and boys are also victims, particularly in the areas of forced labour and criminal exploitation. So we can't dismiss that it doesn't happen to men and boys. And I think the last myth that comes to mind is that victims always try to escape. I would say most victims feel that they actually can't escape. There's trauma bonding, there's threats to their families, there's lack of legal status, not having the right paperwork and having that freedom, or total, complete dependency on the trafficker. This can trap victims psychologically as well as physically. So I tend to feel it's a little bit on the side of victim blaming when someone says that they had the chance to leave but couldn't. It's so much more complex than that.
What is it that we can do, Renee, in schools, at home, or as a society? What kind of solutions? This is it seems like this dark pit that one doesn't know how to come out of.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit hopeless at times, but I do want to encourage you and whoever's listening, it's not totally hopeless. There are things that we can be doing at a ground level. And that's, having honest, age-appropriate conversations about media, consent, online harms. It starts there, doesn't it? Because as we said before, these things all exist on that same continuum of harm. So if we're going right back to the beginning and looking at that prevention education, thinking about how we can be talking about these things and incorporating these things into our everyday conversation with our family, with our colleagues, with our community. That's really where it starts with these conversations. And from there, thinking about, okay, how can we hold corporates to account? How can we advocate for stronger laws? How can we leverage our sphere of influence and mobilize the people around us to take action? You don't need a huge organization to do that. It can be you and a friend, it can be that easy. But I would encourage people, look for groups who are doing this, join them, build each other up. Because really when we're coming together, when we're collectively shouting out against the exploitation of women and children and boys and men, there really is no end to what we can achieve.
So you call yourself a trauma counselor, and I'm sure many of our listeners are really curious. Why do you identify with that title, and what does it mean to you personally, Renee?
Yeah, the term trauma counselor really reflects the heart of the work I've been doing with survivors, supporting people who have lived through deeply distressing, often life-altering experiences like abuse, exploitation, violence, and trafficking. Trauma isn't just something that happened in the past. It rewires the brain. It floods the body with survival responses. It can shape how someone sees themselves, how they see others, and how they see the world long after the event has passed. So as a trauma counsellor, my role is to help survivors make sense of what's happened to them, not in a way that forces them to relive it, but in a way that restores their sense of agency, their sense of safety and self. So it's about walking alongside someone as they rebuild gently and intentionally and at their own pace. So it's not just about talking it out, it's about helping someone reconnect with their body, their story, and their future.
So what message would you want to leave with young people, especially girls, who are really growing up in this very, very hyper-sexualized world?
My message to girls, you were never made to be consumed. You're not a product, a pose, or a trend. You're wildly valuable beyond filters, beyond followers, and worthy of love that doesn't hurt or humiliate. I really want girls to understand that the industry is selling you empowerment while profiting from your objectification are lying to you. Real empowerment isn't about being desirable. It's about having agency. It's about the freedom to say no, the freedom to speak out, to take up space, to stand with others fighting for justice. So I would encourage any young girls who are listening, refuse to be reduced, challenge the systems that exploit you, and join others in the work of lifting each other up.
Thank you, Renee, for taking out the time today and being on the episode. We wish you all the best with all the work, amazing work that you're doing. And like I said, it's been an honor to have you.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Renee.